That's right. They need a better grip.
Oh boy, it's going to be one of those.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified with your host, Eric Taylor, and myself, Shiva. Today we have with us Joseph E. Brunsman, and he's going to have to tell us what that E is for. He is an insurance guy. And I know what you're thinking. We don't like insurance guys, but I think we might want to make an exception for this one. What's up, Jim? How's it going?
Hey, so E stands for excellence.
There we go.
No, I'm just kidding. I wish my parents were
Great Kool-Aid.
That would have been pretty awesome. No, it's Edward. Yeah, actually, I don't like insurance guys either. So
what brought you to being the insurance guy to the stars? And by stars, I mean, I guess the tech community and customers.
Yeah. So kind of long story short, former IT, got my bachelor's in robotics from the Naval Academy. Once I was getting out of the Navy, I was about 30 by that time. So I'd been in for about 12 years. And, Eric knows, right? Constantly being deployed, always gone. Even when you're home, you're working, 10, 12 hours a day sometimes. Not super conducive to starting a family. So I was married and it was like, all right, I don't want to be like 50 years old, some like 50-year-old 06 with like a 4-year-old running around. That would probably be the death of me. So that's when I decided like, hey, time to get out, go do something else. Well, my father-in-law, who's also an academy grad, he had started an insurance brokerage. And so his idea was, hey, why don't you come try this out? If you like it, stick around. If not, just go do whatever you want to do. Right. Because I was like, I really want to do like med school or law school, something like that. Until I remembered how much I actually hate going to school. So I did a little bit of research. Turns out that the average insurance guy, they're actually pretty old. So they're something like 75% are supposed to retire in the next 7 years. So I was like, a lot of my competition is going to leave.
Or die.
Or die. And let's be real, right? Insurance people are not generally the smartest. So in terms of...
I know not of what you speak. I've never come across an absolute idiot in the insurance industry. Never have.
Well, I mean, like if you just look at the psychometric scale, right? You look at just median IQ by profession, right? So like when you start getting into like computer science, technology fields, right? That's generally at least a standard deviation or two above the median in the US. So now we're talking for technology people, right? 115, 130 IQs, right? That's why like you can't just teach everybody how to program. Like it's not that simple. The insurance community, where I'm at my level, which is agent, broker, business owner level, it's about 104. So that means like if I, in theory, needed to hire somebody extra, I could pick anybody off the street, flip a coin, 50% chance they're going to meet, I'll say, average insurance IQ requirements.
Are we talking about insurance people here or MSPs? Because it sounds pretty similar here.
Dude, I'm starting to wonder if you're talking about general population. I mean, most of the folks that I've ever dealt with that's in any sort of insurance, they are close to normal private sector retirement or just after, and they're just looking to collect that additional income on top of their pension or, Social Security check or whatever. Stuff keep busy.
Well, and one of the problems is, and Eric, you can relate to this, and so can Shiva, right? Like we come from worlds where there's a publication for everything, right? So when I left the Navy, like let's say you're a cook in the Navy and the commanding officer comes to you and he goes, hey, you're going to go launch a Tomahawk missile right now. And you're like, dude, I'm a cook. What are you talking about? It's literally follow these instructions, missile will fire and go boom somewhere. Right. So there's an instruction for everything. So when I came into the insurance world, I was like, where's the instruction manual? Right. Like, how do I know that what I'm saying isn't just tribal knowledge? Like, how do I know it's actually both real and correct? And there just wasn't really anything out there. So actually at this point, I've written, 3 books on insurance. So the first one was on E&O. The second was on cyber insurance and cybersecurity law. So is the third one. The fourth book I contributed to, which is right there, I contributed a chapter on insurance for blockchain and cryptocurrency. And then I'm actually writing yet another book right now, all on insurance for MSPs, right? Specifically like tech E&O, EPLI, D&O, that kind of stuff. So a lot of it's really just been, I just had to like teach myself, and I've kind of been autodidactic my whole life anyways. Like I've always really just hated school, never enjoyed it whatsoever. But it's something like I'm just naturally kind of curious in, because I can bring in, I also have a master's in cybersecurity law now. So I bring in that side, the insurance side, my technical background. I try to kind of bring those three elements together to actually add value to people, right? Because any dummy can sell a policy, but that's really only a third of the battle.
Why a book focused on MSPs and cybersecurity? Why not just take out the target market of MSPs? Because I think everyone needs the same level. Let me rephrase this. I think everyone needs the same type of protection, just different levels based on their scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So one of the issues is, what I've seen with MSPs is, I guess, like one, they don't know what they don't know, right? So I see MSPs where they go to their general insurance guy, right? And then obviously chaos ensues. So they think they have what they need, but they actually don't, right? And it sounds very technical, but at the end of the day, if this field was that complex, they wouldn't let insurance people do it, right? So a lot of the MSP community, like, they don't even know what questions to ask. They don't even know what types of insurance they actually need. And then you get into the whole idea of risk management and risk transference.
Oh boy, you're going way over the typical MSP. They can't even identify risk, much less manage it. Come on.
So think about it this way, right? A lot of people listening to this, they either have cyber insurance, they're going to get cyber insurance, or very shortly, they're going to be forced to get it through some contractual requirement, right? For MSPs, increasingly, it's a contractual requirement for their clients to handle and actually obtain their own cyber insurance policy. There's a very rational reason for that.
I have a question for you there.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate taking on other people's risk. And that's partly why I prefer the VAR side of the business as opposed to MSP.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really, and by you, meaning if you're an MSP, do you really want to be part of that conversation telling your client, hey, you should get a cyber policy? Because the way I look at that is now you're in that risk chain because you brought it up to them. And when they go buy the cheapest policy possible that doesn't cover anything or carves everything out, they can say, well, my IT guy told me to go get a policy. This is what I got. He probably looked it over and said it was okay. So it's his fault.
Yeah. So as an MSP, you should not be giving any sort of official opinion on the quality of a insurance policy. Now, that being said, I do have a video. So I have a YouTube channel. If you just search for my name, it'll pop up. And I have a whole series of videos on there, literally just for MSPs. One of which is, this is really for everybody, just basically how to understand and explain cyber insurance, right? It's like 10 minutes long. And I swear to God, you watch that video, you just repeat what I say, you'll know more than 99% of insurance guys telling this stuff, right? It's not super difficult. Cyber insurance has 2 sides and 4 buckets. I'm like, that's it, right? So the 2 sides is, first, you have to think about something called third-party liability. Easiest way to explain that, somebody wants money from your business. So that could be a client, that could be some sort of regulator, that could be a media liability claim, that could be PCI DSS, for example, payment card industry data security standards, right? Class action lawsuits. Somebody wants money from your business, generally because of some type of cyber event that has occurred. The other side is what we call first party, right? Very straightforward. Things that you would pay for, or you'd be legally obligated to pay for if you didn't have insurance, right? So just 2 sides. People want money from you, things you got to pay for. Within the first party, there's really only 4 buckets. And the first is going to be data breach. And then all of these coverage features, they just fall into these buckets. The first, data breach, you're looking at attorney, forensics, breach notification, credit monitoring, some business interruption in there, situationally, crisis management, PR, call center, that kind of stuff, right? Then you have the second bucket, which is ransomware, right? Now you're going to have a lot of the same things: attorney, forensics, situationally, breach notification, credit monitoring. I don't want to get into why that is, but situationally, that could be the case. You're also looking at extortion payments, a negotiator, some type of like damage restoration, business interruption costs, some reputational harm if clients leave following a breach. That's pretty much it, right? And there's maybe some other kind of things that could fall in there, but those are really the big ones. From there, you have loss of funds. And this is where it starts getting dicey, because I've read, probably well over 150, 200 different cyber insurance policies, because I'm a nerd like that. And
come on, man, I was expecting thousands.
I know, right? So, well, these are from different carriers, right? So these are all different. And with that, loss of funds, you got to be careful, because there's no standard verbiage, like there's no standard words in cyber insurance yet. We're kind of getting there, but something like social engineering coverage, that could mean two completely different things. It just depends on what the definition in the policy actually says, and if there's, of course, any like amendments or exclusions later on. So as a business, you just have to figure out beforehand, unfortunately beforehand, really what you're worried about, right? So some of these could be, hey, are you worried that like your CFO could get tricked into wiring money to a bad guy somewhere? Right? Well, then look for that type of coverage in the definition. Are you worried that bad guy gets into your system, tricks all of your clients and vendors into wiring money it's not supposed to go, right? Sort of like an invoice manipulation, reverse social engineering type coverage. You got that in there. There's kind of some other ones that are oddly in there, depending upon the carrier. But those are really the two big ones I think most businesses are going to look for. There's some like loss of contractual potential revenue stuff. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of like little odds and ends, but those are the big ones.
I have a question on that. I know this is going to vary by insurance company. How are insurance companies defining a data breach these days?
So the legal definition, 90% of the time, is going to be two things: access and acquisition of covered information. By covered information, I mean PII, PHI, PCI, that type of thing, right? If you look in a breach notification law, it's going to say, this is the stuff that has to be protected, in essence, right? So social security numbers, driver's license numbers, don't forget about that one. Bank account numbers with some method of access, credit card, debit card numbers with a PIN associated with them, biometric data in some circumstances, that type of information, right? So a lot of it's going to be really the forensics guy coming in and saying, hey, we have a reasonable determination that this information was both accessed and acquired by somebody who wasn't supposed to have access to it, right? And that's, I won't get into a risk of harm analysis, but that's like 90% of it right there.
Well, and just to be upfront here, I think a breach should be defined as unauthorized access, not even exfiltration, because there are too many ways to get away from having to admit data was exfiltrated. And the most typical one that I've seen so far is there's no indication that data has been taken.
So we can, there are some times, so I've dealt with, and last year was probably 2 breaches a week, at least a breach a week, just for my own client base that I've dealt with. So like we will see circumstances where we just don't know, right? So often that'll be seen, like if you have a company and they're purely US based, right? And Eric, you can probably attest to this, right? You have a company, they're only in the US, all their employees are in the US, and you have like weird traffic outflows to like Jordan or Qatar or Russia or China. Then we can probably say like, okay, then the forensics guys, they start tracking back. What could that information have been? And they do kind of all the forensics, super nerdy stuff that's beyond my comprehension. right, to help in that. Sometimes we get to a point where the forensics comes back and they say, hey, you know what, like you've got employees overseas, we got people using VPNs, like there's all of these kind of unknowns here. And so with that, we're just not sure if something's been acquired or not, right? Like we know there's been access, but we don't know if there's been acquisition of that information.
I have a question there. Who would you blame if that's the answer they come back with? Because the first thing I think of, and Eric, maybe you want to jump in on this. If there's not appropriate logging to identify what was done by the bad guys, then whose fault is that?
So go ahead, Eric.
I would, I was sitting back and enjoying. I'm just taking it in. I'm like, hey, maybe I won't say anything this episode. That'd be a rare one. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times that's what we actually do see. There's improper PowerShell logging. There's improper sysmon. There's improper, logging of the firewall. Things have been, deleted, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the times their actions have been obfuscated or not tracked at all. So when an IR firm like us comes back and says, hey, there's no logging to prove anything. So we always advise you have to go on the assumption of data exfiltration, because you can't prove a negative.
Yep.
Or you can't prove a non-negative. So, how does the insurance company really look at things like that when we can't prove it? There's always those trait actors, of ransomware, certain ransomware groups will do, and they are known for data exfiltration. Most of the time it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, how does an insurance company wrap their head around that when I come back and say, hey, we have to assume data exfiltration, even though we can't prove it?
Yeah. So on our end, what I've seen from insurance companies is they just default to breach notification letters, credit monitoring, right? Like they just assume, and there's a rational reason for that. It's because if we get that risk of harm analysis wrong, right? So like forensics comes back and they're like, we don't know, right? The insurance companies probably going to default to notification of the clients. And the reason for that is if we screw that up, on the business side, then now we're talking about regulators coming after you, right? For failure to notify, late notification. And that just opens up a Pandora's box of all types of terrible, awful things where I call it the investigatory death spiral, right? So investigator comes in, and you'll see this all the time, like with HIPAA, right? So, like,
sorry, I don't think HIPAA works, but sorry.
Oh, it rarely works, but when it does, it can lead to some crazy results. So like there was a case where literally the stereotypical guy left a laptop in the back of his car at a bar, laptop gets stolen, right? Turns out there was the potential for a bunch of unencrypted PHI on that laptop. So then they notify, right? Because they're like, well, we're not really sure. Then HHS OCR comes in and they start digging around. And then they're like, okay, so you kind of handled this one correct, but it turns out you have a bunch of other failures that you never reported, right? And you're not adhering to HIPAA high tech. And you have issues with your business associate agreements, and just on and on and on. And that actually led to about $1 million fine against that business, right?
Did they actually have to pay?
We don't know. And that's a good point for anybody that has a cyber policy. So actually this book right here, this is my copy. If people go to my website, they can actually just download this for free. It's thebrunsgroup.com/book2. And it's like 500 pages. So I wouldn't recommend you read the whole thing. But a good point to know is that regulatory fines and penalties, literally it says, you ask an insurance guy, normal insurance guy, hey, if a regulator comes after me, do I have coverage for that? And they'll go, yeah, you have coverage for regulatory fines and penalties in your policy. The trick is the operative term in all of these policies, they're essentially going to say, where insurable by law. Now, where is that insurable by law? I have no idea. And I don't think anybody else has any idea. So let's say New York comes after you, or Massachusetts, or Florida, or Texas, or Virginia, or any state regulator. Are those fines and penalties insurable? Maybe. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours trying to figure this out. Could part of that cause of action be insurable, the other part uninsurable? Sure. Right? What if the FTC comes after you and now you have a 20-year consent order and there's just a laundry list of cybersecurity controls? Like, you're essentially mapping to NIST CSF after that. And you're hitting all the big pain points and the expensive pain points, I will say.
You know, the reason I ask if they pay, because with HHS,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen companies appeal the fine and HHS forget to come back to re-audit.
Oh, I'm not saying they're competent. That's a whole different discussion. I'm just talking on the insurance side.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
And one thing I think that people need to realize, this is a key point for businesses that they just don't know, and it will burn them. These breach notification laws, it doesn't matter where your business is located. It's where your clients are residents of.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're an accounting firm and you're next to a military base, right? And you're a small accounting firm. You may have to deal with all 50 different state and territory breach notification laws. But wait, it gets worse. When we say breach notification laws, that's really kind of a bad term, because actually many of these laws have cybersecurity requirements built into them and regulatory fines and penalties if you don't adhere to those, right? So you may be in, and I had this, a firm in Virginia that got hit with fines and penalties from the state of Massachusetts. And that's because they had a client who was a Massachusetts resident. Right now, all of a sudden, after that breach, right, these laws are going to say, hey, these are all the people you have to notify, and there's various thresholds, various government offices you have to speak to. Massachusetts comes back and they go, all right, show us your incident response plan. Show us your breach response plan. Show us your data recovery plan. Show us your list of internal controls, right? And just on and on and on. And this firm just didn't have it. So they got pegged. And so one thing I think firms need to realize is many of these laws have something called a reasonable cybersecurity requirement. Reasonableness is a legal term, right? That is not like, what like Shiva, Eric, and Joe think. The best way to explain that, if you're a business out there, and I'll use a military analogy here, right? If you're at the wrong end of a very long table, I see Eric laughing because he knows where I'm going with this. If you're at the wrong end of a very long table and there's a bunch of government bureaucrats that are going to get paid on the 1st and 15th, if it's World War III, they're still getting paid on the 1st and the 15th. If the world shuts down, they're getting paid on the 1st and the 15th, right? They have no idea what it takes to run a business. They have no idea what budgeting is or what your overhead is. They don't know any of that stuff. What they're going to do is they're going to sit there and they're going to go through the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is their standard. And they're going to go line by line. And you as a business owner have to say, after some event, why you did or did not implement certain controls. So things like MFA, 2FA, it's just a security awareness training, just to use basic examples, right? That I think would kind of generally apply to just about everybody. You're going to have to explain to them why you didn't want to pay like a couple extra bucks per user per month. And that's just going to be a very hard sell, I would say. So there's a lot of businesses out there where once they actually start to realize what laws could apply to them, what those laws may reasonably mean, right? And we're not even talking about the Massachusetts law, 201 CMR 17, or New York Shield Act, that just have lists of 15, 20 things you have to do if you meet those thresholds.
Which state do you think has the most stringent requirements?
It depends.
In terms of post breach,
I would say Massachusetts. In terms of post breach, so on the
notifications, what you have to do, the investigation, the whole kit and caboodle that you probably have to run through.
It kind of depends. So there's some states that they've got really stringent requirements on the front end, like Massachusetts, New York, situation like California. I think Colorado just passed a new law. I got to dig into that one. I think was it? It's either Ohio, Iowa, or Illinois. It's one of those where pretty much like after every breach, they're going back to your legal counsel, right? And they're asking questions, right? A lot of it's really just going to depend on who, not to be cynical here, who's the attorney general and if they want to run for Congress. That's really what it seems to boil down to. So I mean, it could change tomorrow. Why do these attorney generals care? Do they really care about cyber breaches?
It's a really one headline.
Yeah, it's what are they going to say when they run for Congress? I stood on consumer protections, right? I'm fighting the war against identity theft. Here's what my office did. So, you know, and if they have to bankrupt your company to do it, I don't think they're going to care, quite frankly. I mean, the FTC's done it to businesses. They've bankrupted people. So
one thing that, I mean, you kind of struck up a couple chords there with me. So, you know, we have been doing some consulting with some organizations, and they literally will look at me like, oh, we don't have to worry about a lot of these cybersecurity policies and things like that. You know, we're just a reseller on Amazon, Etsy, or whatever, you know, bullshit online portal there is. I'm like, no, that doesn't matter. You are doing a direct shipment to a customer. It doesn't matter who your payment broker is and who brokered the agreement of the product or services that you're doing. Your end customer is in said state.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair assessment from a insurance broker standpoint, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, a lot of it, obviously it's going to depend on the company and what the particular fact patterns of their business are and what they're doing and where they're located and who their customers are and what type of information they're holding. But I would just say, like, you know, broadly speaking, businesses have way more requirements than they think they do. I mean, way more. And even as a cyber insurance guy, I will just say, you know, cyber insurance is great, but it has its limits. Right? There are many things that cyber insurance cannot and will not do.
Like,
and so, for example, ask an average insurance guy, hey, if I get hit with ransomware, will the policy pay the extortion? What's the insurance guy going to say? Yeah, it's right here in the declarations page. It'll pay up to whatever the sublimit or aggregate limit is of that policy, right? That's not necessarily true, right? And Eric, you can attest to this.
Yep, I was waiting for you to go down this path.
So,
station, I love that.
So like when a business tells me like, you know, why am I paying for multiple backups? Like, what's the point of that when the policy would just pay to get my information back anyways? Like, what's the point? Right? So you could talk about, well, there's not always a promise that they're going to give you the key, right? There's not always a promise the key's going to work, although I think that's probably more rare than common, right? Because they are trying to run a business, even though they're evil bad guys. But like, let's say, you know, you could say, oh, well, what if the damage is, like they damage the files through that encryption process, like, and you just can't even restore those files, right? Like you're just never going to get that back. So there's that, but the business owners, you know, they like, okay, what are the odds of that? I don't know enough about it to even know if that's real or not. But if you get hit with a strain of ransomware, and this will come out in the forensics, that's on the OFAC sanctions list, effectively that means it's against the law to pay the ransom. So I hope to God you have appropriate backups, because if you don't, there's nothing I'm going to say to the insurance company, because they don't want to get sanctioned by the U.S. government to pay
IR firm either. They don't want to get slapped by that, because oh my gosh, I've heard about an IR firm that I will keep out of it just because they're buddies of ours and we do a lot of work for them. But you know, they got, you know, some government officials crawling up some parts of bodies they didn't want ever inspected, you know, and that's just not something that any incident response firm ever wants to go through. So it's, oh, hell no. Do not want to be on the bad side of that one.
Yeah. And if you're a business and you got hit with one of these strains and everyone's saying, yo, we're not paying the ransom because it's against the law, like you're done. You're done if you don't have appropriate backups.
I think in more cases than not, you are done, because most small businesses will never spend on anything more than Dropbox for backup. And let's be clear here, Dropbox is not a backup.
Oh, so when I was back doing MSP, and you see this just as well as I have, Shiva, that companies will always say, oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We've said on the show many times, companies are going to do things as cheaply and as long as possible until they're forced to do otherwise. As soon as there's a breach, there's a ransomware, there's some sort of impending doom, it is amazing how many couches they're able to overturn to find the effing money to pay whatever it needs to be done to get their business back up and running again.
So what you're really saying is, as an MSP, they will never pay you, but as an IR firm, they love paying you.
Oh,
Pretty much, right?
yeah, we'll go down that route. Sure.
Well, here's what I tell people, right? Just do an internet search for breach response notification letter, right? Almost without exception. At least everyone I've ever seen. I mean, maybe there's one that hasn't said it, that hasn't said it, but every single one I've ever read, it's always got a clause in there. We've increased our cybersecurity budget. We're implementing additional controls, like blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. You can't just say that and not have a lawsuit filed against you. Like, if you're going to say it in that letter, right, that's a legal letter, you have to be able to back that up. So, one thing I think business owners don't realize is just how painful that process would be, right? It's not, hey, I got cyber insurance. I got hit with ransomware. All right, I'm just taking a vacation for a week. I'm putting all the boys on vacation. We'll come back and start up when everything's good again, right? Like, it is not that simple. Like, there is so much more to it. And I've literally had, I hate to say it, but like, I've had literally just grown men on the phone just crying, right? That are business owners just crying, right? As we're going through this. Like, it's not fun. It's not stress-free. And almost without exception, it's going to be, if I knew it was this bad, I would have done X, Y, Z way beforehand, right? Because they end up doing it anyways. But sometimes you just got to touch the stove. Like, I got 2 small boys, right? Right now I have, one boy earlier when he was about a year and a half old, he broke his elbow. Currently, my oldest son, who's 4, now has a black eye because he tried to catch a golf ball with his eye.
He caught it. Just the wrong.
Got it. He stopped it. So now he's got a black eye, and he's in a cast because he actually cracked his olecranon, which is the point of your elbow. Cracked it. And he's going to school on Tuesday with a black eye and in a cast. Like, some people, like, they're just not going to believe you. They won't, if you're like, the stove is hot, don't touch the stove. Like, they got to touch the stove.
Speaking about touching the stove, how have you seen policy applications change in the last year or even 6 months because of all the ransomware? I got to imagine that, and I knew you're on the other side of this because you're an insurance guy, but cybersecurity was always a money grab by the insurance companies. They didn't understand the risk. So they're like, hey, we'll give you a policy. Worst case, we pay a couple $1,000s. We're still net, maybe a couple $1,000 on your policy. Now you're paying anywhere between, let's say, $2,000 and $20,000 for your cyber policy, but your ransomware costs, your ransom is $500,000. The lawyers, the IR, they're bleeding money. So how has the application process changed in your eyes?
A couple things there. So I don't think it was ever a money grab per se. I think it was a territory grab.
Sorry,
right?
Rephrase that. It was a revenue generation initiative.
Yeah. So
let's be clear. So, when they were, and Joe will probably attest to this, at least I'm thinking so, because it's been my thought, was, when they were selling cybersecurity and policies, it was just like anytime you're getting into any line of business, there was no metric to base the lost revenue on. There was no risk assessment that you could be able to apply to this. Now that we're, say, 10 years into it, the insurance companies are actually seeing, holy McFuck, we have a problem.
Yeah. And they got a big problem. So there's kind of a couple issues with the cyber insurance world right now, right? Like, I mean, and take it from my perspective, I'll be completely selfish here, right? I've spent thousands of hours. I mean, shit, I wrote 2 books, right? I've written like 14 some odd peer-reviewed magazine articles, most of which were just completely based around cyber insurance, cybersecurity law. They're like, I've been waiting. So I'm like, dude, I put all this time and energy into like this one very specific thing. Like, when are the premiums actually going to go up? Like, when is that going to happen? Where the juice is going to be worth the squeeze in terms of all of the time and effort I put into this. Well, going back like 5 years, I think it was insurance companies realized, there's not that many new businesses being created every year. So they thought, hey, this is the growth area, right? Like, this is where the growth's going to be. But they didn't really know what they were getting into. And so as of right now, I will tell you, insurance companies are losing money hand over fist on cyber policies. So when you see like some insurance company, like, they just finished another series of funding and everyone's like, oh, look at these guys, are doing so well. No, those idiots are blowing through mountains of cash, right? They're not making any money. Really what they're doing is you have the established insurance companies who are like, okay, if we don't do this, somebody else is. Once they get in, now there's another broker in there. Then they're going to take away all the stuff we've always done, right? Business owners, policies, auto, life, health, all the general line stuff. So they tried to jump into it. And they were like, they did the math because they've got brilliant statisticians and mathematicians and actuaries on their teams. So they kind of thought like, okay, we might break even, maybe lose a little bit of money. But in terms of keeping the rest of the policies there, that's a strategic advantage we have to have. Then you had a bunch of like venture capital bros who jumped in, who were like, this is the growth area. And they're all trying to be like the Uber of cyber insurance, where they're thinking, hey, if I just burn through more cash than the other guy, as long as I'm the last guy standing, like I win this round, right? It's a winner take all mentality. I'll just say this. We do have, and you guys would know who this is. I'm not supposed to know this, so I'm not going to tell you the name of this cyber insurance company. We have something in the, no, this is cyber insurance. I have my own issues with Kaseya and their terms of service and all that, but they have a very lengthy questionnaire. They've been doing this for well over probably 10, 15 years at this point. In the insurance world, we have something called a loss ratio, which is effectively just a ratio of how much comes in versus how much goes out. What you want to do is make that 100, right? What comes in is exactly what goes out, because in the interim, you invest that cash that people pay you in premiums. You make money, what's called off the float. That's how Warren Buffett got so rich. Right now, the loss ratio at this insurance company is like well over 170%, which means for every dollar of premium that comes in, $1.70 goes out the door, right? So they're just bleeding through cash. So what we're seeing is the application questions, cybersecurity, there's really kind of only so many ways to cut that pie, right? Like there's only so many controls that you can implement out there. NIST CSF isn't, really being updated in a large sweeping material way. So what we're seeing is, one, they're paying more scrutiny to the applications. Two, they're actually mandating controls to some degree. So some of those are very basic. So you'll see, hey, you have to have cloud backups. One insurance company is doing that. Like if you don't have cloud-based backups, you're only going to get $75,000 in ransomware coverage, which Eric will tell you, if you're a business of any size, you might just end up paying all of that to him in forensics, and then the rest is coming out of your pocket, right? And that would not be unheard of, well within the realm of possibility. So we're seeing they're being a little smarter. I would say they're still dumb, but they're kind of getting smart on mandating specific controls and paying closer scrutiny to the applications. And then we're also seeing a lot of these companies where if they just kind of don't have foundational things, like I'll say antivirus, anti-malware, believe it or not, you used to be able to get a cyber policy without having that. Obviously you have to have that now, MFA, 2FA, that kind of backups.
Can you really have anti-malware or not? Can you really have antivirus and not have anti-malware, or one or the other?
Mm-hmm.
Webroot doesn't count.
Oh. Well, even with Gravity Zone, you could enable and disable certain modules. A lot of the ones, I mean, you've been in the enterprise EDR space a little long, Shiva. So, your
Yes,
vision.
I like using real tools. I don't like the bullshit that is the MSP market and their tools. I like companies that have real security behind themselves and processes.
So, you're a little fuzzy that you can enable and disable certain modules inside of the MSP platform, AV, EDR, whatever the case is. So yes, you can very much easily have that. Even your on-based Windows OS for, Defender, you're able to enable and disable certain parts of that, right? So, the tools that me and Shiva use that we've talked about before, a lot of that stuff is, it is part of the suite. So, you've got to pretty much almost take an act of Congress to try to get some of these things disabled. So it's kind of good for security, but you definitely struck some chords with me, because in all the incident responses, even the ones that, we're allowed to be the front man because there's not a quote unquote panel, I don't want to get sidetracked on a whole different topic, but I've never once had them yet come back and say, what was their current insurance or their current compliancy regulation they were going to? What standards were they adhering to? Any of that stuff. They just are asking, are you negotiating? What's the price? Who's the threat actor? OFAC, things of that nature. They're not asking the questions that you're talking about yet. So before I go into self-attestation and NIST and all this, are you starting to see where companies or insurance companies are actually asking these things and denying claims, when they are actually asking these questions? Because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, so you can go back to, what was the name of the case? It's like Cottage Health was the name of the company. So essentially, like, what would happen is you wouldn't see it on the IR side. Effectively, if there's going to be a declination of coverage, what we're seeing is it would be after the fact, right? So like they would go through, they would pay for all this stuff, and then they'd go back and try and sue the company, right? In which case, even trying to find a declination of coverage in any insurance vertical, right? Any type of insurance policy is really hard to do, because a lot of the time it either gets squashed before it ever becomes an issue that would go to court, or if it's kind of like after the fact. Insurance companies are really smart, right? So they generally bring in, if they're going to deny coverage on somebody, what they do is they bring in, I'll say, an unbiased third-party law firm, right? That actually does the determination there. And then from that, then they say, hey, this outside third party, they said, yeah, we're correct. We're going to deny coverage here. And let's be real, right? You're a mom and pop shop. Are you going to come up with like 250 grand, right? Are you going to fight a court case against an insurance company? Like, they would really have to do something outrageous. And so right now what we're seeing is without getting like super nerdy, but the language of the policies is being more strictly construed, right? It used to be, it was just the broadest policy language of any type of insurance you would ever see. And then it just kind of gets chipped down over and over time as they start to realize, okay, what are these kind of niche cases that we have to cover given this language, but now we want to change that. And so part of this too is even things which arguably should be denied coverage, because of all the venture capital money coming in, a lot of these insurance companies, I think, are just kind of sitting on the fence going, if this case is big enough to deny, it's going to be big enough to make the news. And then people like me are going to write about it and make videos about it. And then other insurance brokers who don't understand this stuff are just going to go, well, that's a company that denied coverage. Nobody else seems to be doing it as far as they're aware. And so then they just won't sell that policy anymore. So there's kind of like a lot of balls in the air, as it were, as to how all this actually plays out.
Are you seeing an actual framework being adopted by the insurance group? There's been a lot of stuff in the news about some of the top 50 insurance brokers getting together, creating their own, collaborative group and doing some sort of mandate.
That's called a circle jerk, Eric.
Yeah, well, no, what's next is called the circle jerk, where Biden gets together with tech leaders and discuss a new policy, that's the circle jerk. Maybe that's circle jerk part 2. I don't know, but it's
The sequel.
yeah, the sequel to be continued. I don't know what the industry is going to do. Me and Shiva have been talking about this for quite some time. We want to see some sort of damn compliancy to fall down on businesses. Even doing CIS, version 8, doing fucking something. Let's do something. We've got to be the smartest bunch of dumb fucks when it comes to security, when it comes to business.
Yeah. So honestly, the laws are already there. I don't know what Biden's talking to these people about, because the laws already exist in most states and at the federal level to really go after businesses for just terrible cybersecurity. So I think really the most elegant solution to all of this, because the states don't, obviously, they don't have the expertise, right? Like, if you're smart and you're in cybersecurity, you're probably not going to be working a 9 to 5 for a local government. Like, that's just, you're not going to get paid enough, right? It's going to be like a third or a quarter of what you could make.
You're going to work for a major company that donates to someone's campaign. And do you really want to give up on your fundraising by going after these guys?
Well, I think the most elegant solution to all of this is some type of, as much as this makes me cringe, but some type of federal funding that gets allocated to the states to actually enforce their own cybersecurity laws, right? Because
I would take that one step further. I don't want it to be the states, and not that I have anything against the states. You have providers, or you have companies that deal with people in multiple states now with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer a New York company only dealing with New Yorkers. Let's make it a federally recognized standard that the states accept. So you're dealing with one compliance regime as opposed to 50 or 51.
Yeah, it would be, you have like constitutional issues via the 10th Amendment. So like it'd be very difficult to do. Which is why I was saying, like, really at the state level, just funding that. Because even like if somebody goes, hey, what is PII? Like, what do I have to protect? My answer is, it depends, right? Because each state has their own specific requirements on what actually is PII. So
can't the states accept the guidelines of this? And I don't want to call it federal because I don't think it should be government mandated. Federal in terms of nationwide. Can't they accept whatever those controls are, the definition of those controls and what have you?
It would be, the reason I think that state level is the best is because they're closer to the business, right? And like each business, like when we say reasonable cybersecurity controls, that's because it's just really hard to narrow down, like, hey, what are the absolute minimum controls that you have to implement, right? Because
PCI, HIPAA, CGIS, all those other compliances, they're being used elsewhere. So now you have a company, let's say you're in the DC, Baltimore area.
Yeah, right here in Annapolis. Mm-hmm.
So you're probably dealing with Virginia, Maryland, DC, 3 jurisdictions.
Oh, sure.
How hard is that on top of dealing with any federal requirements administratively?
It is, well, I'll just say this, right? So obviously our cybersecurity here is, I'm going to say, better than 99% of insurance people.
I've heard some of the laws going out of Maryland. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so it's, we don't have really any information that would be covered per se, right? So like we don't have social security numbers, bank account numbers, that type of information, right? That would actually mandate many of those laws. But then we try to take the smart route going, hey, we don't want to get hit with ransomware. We don't want to be down for a week, right? Because there's all types of like secondary and tertiary bad effects that can happen as a result of us being down. So with that, we try to kind of kick it up a notch well above and beyond what I think is actually required of us. But to try and, ultimately it just depends on the business, right? Like, let's say you have two pizzerias. So like, let's say you try to pass a law that was like, for every pizzeria, they have to have these minimum cybersecurity controls, right? Well, it just depends on the business, because one, now you're creating a barrier to entry to business, which we could argue if that barrier is justified or not, but now we're kind of limiting upward mobility of people. But two, what if one business is like, we're cash only and we don't take any cards whatsoever. You just paying cash by the slice. And then right next door is another business that has the exact same revenue, the exact same employee count. And they're like, this is not 1950. We don't deal with cash, right? Like, maybe we got a bunch of ex-cons working here. We don't want people working with cash. And so we're only taking cards, right? So now they got to deal with all the various cybersecurity laws, right? Like PCI DSS just being one of them. Like, how would you actually mandate what minimum controls they would have to hold? And that's where I really think that if we just started funding the states, right, those regulatory branches, I think that in a quick hurry, when those stories start coming out, they're like, hey, this business got hit, and then regulators came in, I think that would really give a push, right? It would be that impetus, I think, for a lot of business owners to realize it's not some like ethereal, far away risk, right? Like, they used to kind of say the same thing with cyber security in general, right? It was the whole security by obscurity thing that would knock down security by obscurity on the regulatory side. But all that was standing, I think really what we're going to see, as slow as this process has been, is that I think insurance companies and private companies are actually going to start driving really mandatory cybersecurity controls, right? So we're going to see it where MSPs contractually require businesses to hold cyber insurance. Because of that, those companies have to go get cyber insurance. Then cyber insurance companies, as the market begins to mature, they become much more adept at figuring out what they can actually mandate or not.
Let me ask you a question here. Why would I want to mandate my clients to have cybersecurity, cyber insurance?
Oh, well, there's a couple good reasons, right? One, I mean, we're all tech guys here. So what happens in an event where there's nothing you could do about it?
Call Eric.
Right? Call Eric. So let's say you have a business. There's some practical reasons behind this, right? So you as an MSP, what is your tech E&O policy for? And if you're an MSP listening to this, you should not have an E&O policy and a cyber policy. You should have a tech E&O policy. I have a whole video on that on my YouTube channel that you can dig into. But your tech E&O policy, it's not supposed to be meant as a piggy bank for every time an end user does something dumb, right? So let's say the CEO of one of your clients, they're cruising around on Facebook against his own company policy, starts going to places he's not supposed to be, hits the Facebook ad, goes down that rabbit hole, then boom, ransomware comes in, right? Or they just didn't want any cybersecurity whatsoever, right? They're like, you're just keeping the lights on, right? You're purely on the sysadmin side. I don't care about cybersecurity at all. And then they get hit. Well, in a practical sense, what you do as an MSP is so technical that if you get sued and if you go to court, you're probably going to lose. And I say that because, I mean, just take any random 10 guys off the street and try and explain what you do. It's going to be mom and pop shop. They're out, 150, 200 grand because computer guy didn't keep him safe, right? Even trying to explain what a framework is to somebody, right? You could do the 30-second version or the 10-hour version. So think about it this way, right? Legally, I'll say generally in a legal sense, to bring a claim, the Supreme Court has said there are 3 elements that need to be present at an irreducible minimum, right? Injury in fact, traceability, and redressability. So let's say you're an MSP, like you did nothing wrong. It's 100% on the client, but if you get hit with a lawsuit, you're paying out something. And the whole reason, like, why do people hire MSPs? Because they don't want to know anything about any of this, right? Like they don't want to learn about technology. They don't want to learn about frameworks. They don't want to learn about incident response. They're like, I pay you money. The computer turns on. I have some modicum of safety there. So let's go back to those three elements. Injury and fact. Somebody has to say, they have to prove I was injured, right? My business got hit with ransomware. Traceability, operative term here, but for the activity or lack of activity at my MSP, I never would have been injured, right? Kind of makes sense. Redressability in today's day and age, but if he gives me money, right? If I prevail in this lawsuit and he gives me money, I will be made whole again, right? And that will satiate my needs in this lawsuit. So let's look at the big ticket items that an MSP would have to, or any business, would have to deal with after an event, right? One's going to be like Eric said, right? The forensics cost, that incident response, the attorneys, business interruption, right? Those are elements that you can find under an appropriate cyber policy. So now it's, instead of somebody looking at your policy as a piggy bank when they do something dumb, it's the big elements, large dollar figures, and that redressability element of Article 3 standing to even bring a lawsuit, that starts getting removed, right? Because in the absence of knowledge, we have emotion. So now we bring it back into the real world, and it's not, I got screwed, I'm out, $500,000. It's the attorney sitting down with the client going, okay, listen, the big stuff got taken care of with your cyber insurance policy. So now, maybe it's going to cost $100,000 to litigate this. And when we look at the causes of action we can bring against the MSP, breach of contract, trying to hit that limitation of liability clause, unjust enrichment, negligence, that kind of thing, you may only get $50,000 at the end of the day, right? So now it's not this emotional, oh my God, I hate this person. It's, am I really going to spend $100,000 to get $50,000 back if I win?
If it's Kaseya, yes.
And then there's also some other, so that's kind of like the nerdy side of it. There's also some practical sides to it, right? If let's say they come after you, right? And let's say they win and they prevail on the claim. How long is that going to take? A lot of businesses, they cannot weather, right? Like Eric, if they don't have insurance, Eric's speaking and he provides services, Eric's going to be going, yo, where's my money? Right? Like, yo, you owe me money. Like your bill is due. And Eric is not going to sit there. I can't imagine if a client comes back to him and the client goes, well, it might be like 6 to 9 months, maybe longer because the court system's shut down.
He might wait because I think Eric once said he's here to help people.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm here to charge people to do a job.
Look, unless I'm not going to speak for all IR firms by any means, but 99% of them, the first block hour agreement is due up front before any and all work is done. So if you're a business owner here, your 50 to 100 hours that you're contracting for must be paid before time is started. Once that first block is adhered to, most companies will not renew that block until another block of agreement is paid upon. Sometimes there are concessions made, but that is so few and far between.
I mean,
you are paying up front.
Probably squeeze a couple hours in between block payments. Maybe. Depending on how big the blocks are.
Yeah. So
question for you, Joe. Now, there are a lot of thought leaders in my industry who are tip of the spear and smarter than I. Kind of. But they're all talking about get your clients to sign a waiver if they decline certain types of security, this, that, or what have you. This is my personal opinion. I don't think those things are worth the paper that they're printed, signed, e-signed on, whatever you want to call it. And it's just a little FUD. What are your thoughts as a insurance guy who's probably had some of those things crop up over the years?
Yeah. So the short answer is when we say limitation of liability waiver, what we're actually talking about is something called an exculpatory agreement, right? Like that's the technical term. We call it limitation of liability waiver kind of in general parlance, but legally that's construed as an exculpatory agreement, right? And effectively what they're trying to say with these agreements, I think they have their place, but firms need to be very careful, right? I know a lot of firms are small shops, right? Like your industry's grown by leaps and bounds, but a lot of it was, a guy who did break fix for like 10, 15 years. Then you got into the MSP side, right? So I think 95% of MSPs are under 5 million in revenue.
99% of MSPs were one-man shows.
Yeah. So with that, you got to be careful, right? It's not as easy as saying, and this is the same with the limitation of liability clause in your contracts. It's not as easy as saying, oh, my buddy has this, so I'm just going to borrow that language, right? Like he paid his attorney, so I'm just going to borrow the language and send it out to me.
No, you just go onto Reddit, you take it from there, and it's legal. Don't worry about it. I am joking for whoever's listening to this. Reddit is
please,
legal.
Please don't do that. Please don't do that. So a little bit of background before I get into like why I think they can be useful in limited circumstances is a little bit of background. Exculpatory agreements, the legality of those and the enforceability of those depends on the state. So once again, it goes back into, in the event of a dispute between the two parties, what mutual jurisdiction have you both agreed that argument will be held in, right? So I'll take a random state. Let's say, for example, and this could be wrong, I don't have the list in front of me. It's somewhere on my computer, but I don't want to pause the thing here. But let's say, for example, in Georgia, they have very strict laws that say, these can be enforceable, but they have to have very specific language. And in the event that language is not specific enough, it will be held against the person who tried to draft that letter in the first place. Now you've just screwed yourself in an additional way that you didn't even know existed because you just wanted to borrow someone's language, right? Other states, they're very kind of laissez-faire. And as long as it's not something that's against public policy or just outrageous kind of to the common man, you're probably going to get away with it, right? So there's a whole spectrum of enforceability or lack thereof. And it depends on the circumstance, the client, what you're doing, what that letter says, how it actually says what's in the letter.
I want to put a little bit of context on it because I think this is probably going to be the most apt example.
Mm-hmm.
IT service provider goes to Joe Schmo, the client, says, hey, we have to put MFA on your systems to access. Client says, no, I don't want them. MSP provider, whoever, sends out a letter along the lines of, okay, we offered you MFA. We told you why you need it.
Mm-hmm.
You declined it, and we still told you why you should have it, but you don't want it. Please sign this to absolve us from any liability. Do you think something like that is going to work if it comes down to litigation?
Well, it depends on the venue, right? Like where the case is being held. But like in a circumstance like that, what are you trying to do at the end of the day, right? As an MSP, you're trying to be able to sit in front of a judge, a jury, a mediator, an arbitrator, and say, listen, I warned these guys this was a problem, right? I even put it in writing. They acknowledged that I told them this was a problem, and they still didn't want to do anything
And
about
what if they never sign it, even though you put out a well laid out letter and can confirm somebody opened it, not necessarily read or understood it?
So assuming that it's properly drafted and legal in your jurisdiction, I would say, even if you sent it to them, even if they refused to sign it, at that point, that's better than nothing, right? But even in that circumstance, we're getting to the point now where MSPs, they have to, how would I put this? They're getting into a world that they've never had to deal with. And this gets into disengaging with clients, which is a friendly term for saying, sometimes you got to fire people, right? So for the MSP, they need to start getting into this mindset, and don't just trust me, right? It's the big brains at the insurance companies, with the actuaries and the lawyers and the statisticians. They're saying, we're not even going to offer insurance to MSPs anymore. Or if we do, it's going to cost a lot more. So with that, the risk is going up, right? So MSPs need to acknowledge the risk is there. Even if it's not their fault, it could still be their problem. They got to get in that mindset. And so if you have a client where you are getting to the point where you have to put out a liability waiver, there has to be that determination in your head of, okay, is this even enforceable? If it is this like the shot across the bow to say like, hey, we're really serious. Like, I don't like business owner, we like you. You're a good client, but I don't think you realize how dumb your current business practices are compared to what they should be. And then once you're getting to that point, now it's at what point are you going to fire that guy, right? At what point is the juice not worth the squeeze to deal with these people? Because the potential liability that's going to come back on your MSP, maybe it's just you got too much heat in the kitchen, right? So there's increasingly, I think MSPs are going to start firing clients. So that's also kind of part of this conversation of when you're getting to that point, there's probably a pretty good chance you're going to end up firing that guy.
Man, we just stepped into church, y'all.
I have a question here for you. Now, you've been, I assume, been doing this for a couple of years, right?
Oh, yeah.
Insurance thing. I come off the street, off the internet, say, hey, Joe, I need insurance. How does that process work with you? Like,
sure. So
can you walk me through, hello to potentially signing a policy?
Yeah. So there's 3 parts to every policy. So the first thing to get into your mind is we call it an insurance policy. It's a legal contract, right? That changes the gravity of what we're discussing. This is a legal contract that you are entering into with an insurance company. There's 3 parts to every policy, right? There's the application, and that's where really business owners tend to kind of freak out and really get into like the weird weeds, kind of like the nitty gritty side. Kind of a couple pointers there. Whether it's like tech E&O application for an MSP or it's a cyber insurance application for a business. A lot of these are actually written by attorneys. So they may ask you questions that they want a binary answer, right? They want yes or no. And as tech guys, we know sometimes it's a maybe, it's a situational, it's I have an equivalent control that's actually housed somewhere else, or this question doesn't apply to me because it's a yes or no answer. There's no NA. Don't be afraid to add an addendum to that application, a separate sheet of paper that just says, hey, here's a brief explanation, right? You're trying to put the legal onus back on the insurance company to ask the appropriate follow-on question, right? Because business owners are always worried, if I answer this wrong, will they come back and deny coverage on me? The second part, which is the policy, like that's where I get to nerd out, right? I go full nerd on policy stuff. And a lot of it is, okay, what are you worried about? And then a lot of what I'm doing is, what should you be worried about that you don't even know exists? So that could be, let's say, social engineering coverage, right? Where, hey, maybe this is the policy for you, but there's rules you got to play by within that policy.
I have a question for you while you're on this topic, and maybe Eric, you can expound on this or give detail. Eric shared with me an application last week, and this insurance company wanted his client or someone he's dealing with to identify the limits they want to be covered for what you were just talking about. So I don't know if you can weave that in to part of your answer.
Sure. Yeah. So part of it is there's limits and then there's sublimits, right? So some things in that policy, they're only going to have like a fraction of what the overall limit's going to be. So ultimately, when it comes to limits, there's really kind of a couple things to consider, right? One is the stereotypical insurance guy answer. How much insurance can you reasonably afford? Not really a good answer. 2, I actually have a whole video on this on my YouTube channel, right? Elements of determining like what you need for cyber limits. It's going to be benchmarking against your peers. It's going to be, some sort of like, I'll say informal, qualitative or quantitative risk assessment of what do you actually have on your system, right? And then what can you just get rid of? Because that's going to lower the cost of a breach. People never think about that. But like, if you just get rid of stuff, like just get rid of it. That's just fewer people we have to notify. That brings the cost down. What type of risk do you have to your business? Right? So is this something where you're worried that, hey, we could have multiple breaches in a year, multiple small breaches, multiple large breaches. We could have a breach and then we could have a class action claim. All of this kind of goes in to the formulation of how much insurance you actually need. Right? But at the end of the day, the one part that nobody ever talks about, which is why I think I've become pseudo famous on like Reddit and various like MSP groups and cyber insurance groups. Nobody ever talks about the compliance side, right? And that's actually what's going to get you. That's what's going to screw you at the end of the day. So I'll give you an MSP example. Okay. Client gets hit with ransomware. What do we do as technical people? We go to the MSA, we go to the SLA or the statement of work, whatever you want to call it, right? We go, okay, what were we contracted to do? Did we do that? Is this our fault or not? Right? Like check yes or no, right? We go to the technical side. But going back, right, once again, we think in technical terms because we have the knowledge. Your client thinks in emotional terms because they don't have the knowledge, right? They're not going to look at what the MSA said. They don't know any of that stuff, right? All they're going to know is, I got hit, I'm out money, now I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
So the MSP is going to sit there and they're going to go, well, this wasn't my fault. Now, in your tech E&O policy, and this is the same for cyber policies, this is what's actually going to screw you at the end of the day. It's probably not a material misrepresentation on the application. It's probably not because you're missing some widget on a policy, right? That you would just be flat out denied coverage. You could be missing some reimbursements. They could be sizable if you get that wrong. Don't get me sideways there, but you're probably not going to be denied coverage. What's most likely going to happen? In your policy, there's going to be two kind of key elements. One, you have to assist with the investigation of whatever claim that you're submitting to your insurance company, right? So they're going to go back. They're going to see all of the back and forth and the emails between, like, say, if you're a company, the head of IT and the CEO and the C-suite, or if you're an MSP, like the trouble tickets, the conversations between the head of the MSP and the business owner. Just because it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your problem. What do I mean by that? In your policy, it says you're required to report anything which may reasonably bring rise to a future claim. And this is the same for all. Now we're getting kind of the E&O side. So just because it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your problem. Your client gets hit with ransomware. We sit there as technical people and we go, we were not contracted to do anything that would have mitigated or eliminated that threat, right? That was the CFO on her lunch break did something dumb against her own company's policy. Maybe she disabled something, enabled a macro on an Excel worksheet that from some random person. And you're like, that's totally on her. So you don't report anything. You renew your insurance policy. Then you get hit with a claim. What do you think your insurance company is going to do? They're going to go back and they're going to say, you should have reasonably known this should have brought rise to a future claim. You're going to get blindsided with the declination of coverage because nobody ever explained this to you. And that's why people hate insurance companies, right? So there's all of this compliance side that, like, insurance guys, one, in most jurisdictions, there's no requirement that the guy selling you the policy has ever actually read the policy, nor is there necessarily any requirement that the guy even understand the policy, nor is there necessarily any requirement that he should be able to advise you on if there's something better that's an alternative out there. And there's kind of some rational reasons for that, but at the end of the day, the insurance community does just a terrible job of helping business owners understand, this is a legal contract. In every contract, there's a back and forth. This is not a give me your money once a year, I'll talk to you next year, right? It's now you have a policy. Now we have to talk about how do you comply with this policy? Because ideally, this is what I tell all my clients, and they look at me sideways until they get it. Ideally, you only want to talk to me once a year when I'm taking your money. Like that's what you want. If you have to call me more than once a year, you're probably having a bad day, right? But what does that mean? If you have to call me, you have to know the rules of the game, right? If you don't know the rules of the game, don't play the game. And there's tons of business owners out there that have cyber policies, that have tech E&O policies. They have no idea how to play the game. And they're absolutely just going to get burned. And I've literally last week, I had a random business call me. They're like, hey man, I saw your videos online. We had the social engineering loss. Our insurance guy never told us that within this policy, it said before you'll get reimbursed, you have to prove that you had a pre-established callback number, right? That you had a known entity on the other end of the phone, et cetera, before that wire ever went out the door. And so now he's out $250,000 and he does not have $250,000 to spare, right? And that's all because, okay, yeah, arguably every business owner is supposed to read their policy in its entirety and ask questions if they don't understand something. But that's where the insurance guy, right, should be kind of adding value there. Like our job is not take paper, move it back and forth and just make money in kind of this like weird, abscess, right? Like we're not just sitting there in the void, just generating revenue. Like we should be adding value somewhere there. So unfortunately, most insurance guys they're not going to add value. They're never going to add value. They're not going to be around long enough to even know what to say to people. So for the business owners out there, the cyber risk is real. Do everything you can to reasonably avoid that incident in the first place. But if you have that incident, you need to make sure you understand what that policy says, what's in that policy, and how to actually comply with the policy.
A lot of people, just to break it down to layman's terms, there's a lot of nuggets in there that people could take away from, but if you're in a tropical area like Florida or, you're subject to house floods or whatever, or even just a car accident, right? You get into a T-bone or you cream the hell out of another car, and you ever go through one of those insurance seminars where you didn't have appropriate coverages and they're coming back after you because, of liability damages and personal damages and, all this other stuff. I mean, just take that and amplify that for your business about 10 times. And now you've got one of these conversations we're talking to you about. It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, Joe, unless Shiva has anything, I know we're well over an hour, and I just want to thank you immensely for your time. We're definitely going to have a part 2 and maybe 3 and 4 of these type of
I think we create our own panel and have him as our insurance expert. And we'll just call him the insurance guy from now on. But I guess I do have a couple of questions more about you. Are you licensed, or are you able to operate in all the states, or is there a geographic area you focus on?
We're pretty much expanding nationwide at this point. Unfortunately, I am not licensed overseas. I get tons of requests from like Australia and France and the UK and all that. Not licensed overseas, but increasingly we're just going further afield, and eventually we'll just be in every state, minus probably like Alaska and Hawaii. So kind of just as a general rule here.
Against Alaska and Hawaii. That's kind of messed up, man.
Oh,
I'm just joking. I'm just putting words in his mouth. So direct the hate to me, not towards him.
Well, Alaska, there's just not enough people there to really make it financially viable for me. And Hawaii is just so far away, like time zone wise, that I just don't want to be up at like 1 a.m. dealing with claims. I'm already up at 1 a.m, like, reading and writing books and stuff like that. So, eventually we're going to be nationwide, but really the standard I've put out for my team here is anybody that calls us gets help. And why do we do that? Because if I was a business owner and I was like, hey, I want cyber insurance, I know nothing about this and my guy's an idiot, like I would want someone just to give me the lowdown, right? Just to say like, all right, dude, like here's the bounds you got to operate in. Here's kind of generally what you need, what to look for, big things to avoid that will get you in trouble. Like that's what I would want. And so, with that kind of like the more love you put out in the world, the more love that's going to come back at you. And so really, I would say probably about 95% of the questions that I get asked are actually already on my YouTube channel. So people can just search Joseph Brunsman, and I've got like 75 some odd videos on there.
You need at least 80. Come on.
I'm working.
Now, where do our listeners get your books?
So if they want to support the cause and keep the wife happy, they can find me on Amazon. That's probably the best place to find it. You can always just download, this book for free on thebrunsgroup.com/book2. That's all about cyber insurance and compliance, like cybersecurity stuff. And then let's see, that book will be revised maybe within the next like 6 months or so. There's just kind of like some little odds and ends that have to get put in there, but 99% of it's still valid. And then as soon as my book on insurance for MSPs comes out, I'll put a link up somewhere. I'll put it on Reddit for free and the various like trade.
Don't give it for free. Charge them. Come on.
Well,
Time and effort.
$1.
Well, it's
Eric,
like,
that would be too expensive. They'd have to negotiate at least a quarter off of that. Come on.
Come on. Dollar make you holler.
well, like honestly, like we don't do any traditional marketing here. So I've done probably every form of traditional marketing you can imagine. And it was just super painful and awkward, cold calling. And, it's terrible. I put out information. It helps the world. And if people like what I say, they can call me and we can do business. Or I have many times where someone goes, hey, I got your video from a friend of a friend of a friend. And this is exactly the problem I'm trying to solve. Let's do business. Right. And a lot of it is, in the insurance world, there's a Pew Research poll that came out recently. So I am more trusted than congressman, but less trusted than a used car salesman. And so, like I said, I don't know what that says about congressmen, but
Nothing good.
Nothing good. So, part of it is by the time people end up calling me, right? There's none of that like, hey, let's establish trust. Let's demonstrate expertise. Like they've already gone through those hoops, right? So they're already like, this guy knows what he's talking about. I trust he's not going to screw me over. I need this thing. That's my guy.
And let's just be fair. Just here, you brought up Australia. Do you really want to do business with a country who has declared war against emus twice in their history?
I would just say, like, at the end of the day, what do business owners need? They need enough knowledge to be able to ask the right questions, right? And so my industry is so bad and it's full of so many stupid people that if I get
You're an MSP?
No.
Think of that. Oh,
No. It's
Wait. I have a question for you. And this is a very important question. You are an insurance, to the listeners, I know we've gone way off base here.
Yeah.
Joe is an insurance guy. Who is the insurance industry's Kaseya?
Oh man. You know what? Like I have been asked so many times to present at trade groups where I would actually like know who these companies are. And I dislike talking to insurance people so much that I've refused every single one of them. Like there's probably a million out there of just, because you got to think, right? Like there's the insurance industry, like it's all built on paper, right? It's a paper promise. And so the problem with insurance is something like 98% of insurance guys leave within 2 years of becoming insurance guys. So like, they don't even know what they don't know. And there's really not a lot of material that, they may learn some like high level principles, but actual kind of like day-to-day concerns and issues that businesses would have, like they don't even know those exist. And so because it's a lot of like dial for dollars, right? Like you eat what you kill kind of a thing. There's just people out there making outrageous promises. And their whole idea, I think in the back of their heads is they're like, I got to keep the lights on. I got to pay for my rent. And by the time something goes wrong, like I'm probably not even going to be here. Right. So like, who gives a damn? Like I'll promise whatever I have to do to make $1. And it's just that mentality leads to all sorts of terrible outcomes for business owners, right? Where there were things that were entirely preventable that if an insurance guy would have taken an extra 5 minutes and just explained like what the rules of the game were, it never would have happened. Right. And anyways, I have a deep disdain for the insurance industry, just by the nature of working in it. But there's a lot of really terrible
So let's
insurance
flip
companies
it.
abroad.
Top 3 insurance providers in the cyber game, not necessarily for MSPs, but maybe your 3 favorites.
It really just depends. So because each cyber policy is different, like there's no real standard coverages per se, because they're all different, it just depends on the company, right? So like one company, when they come to me, maybe we go through the whole list, right? I have about 108 questions or so that I ask new companies that want a cyber policy to really figure out all types of things, right? What regulatory regimes they may fall under. They got to go talk to their attorney about what cyber coverages they need, maybe some basic controls they're missing. One company I'm like, that's a Beasley policy, like right there. Another company, like, it's a Hiscox or an AppBay or a CFC, or it just depends. It just depends on the unique needs of that particular business.
Gotcha.
Cool. Awesome. Well, again, yeah, I've tried taking it out a couple of times, but shit would just trade rolls right over me sometimes, you know? I do want to say the next book should be dubbed the crap you don't know, the insurance game.
The insurance shit you don't know.
Yeah,
I was thinking about calling it, Electric Sheep, right? Because it's just like a PDF that helps you sleep at night.
There you go.
We'll see. That's like the working title as of right now. I got to make
insurance, not comedy.
It's got to be tantalizing. It's got to get the people going.
Hookers and blow.
Talking about sleep and tantalizing and electric is not going to end well for any podcast. That ties take people to places that only sell fans.
Yep. Yeah,
but anyway.
Yeah, I would just tell people, like, just look at my stuff on YouTube. It's not like I'm saying anything magical. I've just spent a few thousand hours looking into this stuff. And you just boil it down, right? So like, let's say your brother-in-law is your insurance guy and you're like, I can't fire my brother-in-law. Just watch my stuff. You'll know what questions to ask. You'll generally know what to look for, and it'll keep you on a 99%.
Tell your brother-in-law to watch Joe's stuff.
Yeah, ideally, yes.
And then you can franchise.
Yeah, because kind of like
I take 30%, just so you know.
So like the 30,000 foot view is, I quickly realized I will not change the insurance community, right? Like, I am not big enough to do it, and nobody really is big enough to change something that large. But what I can do is I can actually get just normal people very concise knowledge to be able to ask the right questions that ultimately are going to force insurance guys to figure this stuff out, right? So like, if an insurance guy was smart, like, what would he do? If he's like, I want to get into cyber insurance, I know nothing about it. What would he do if he was smart? He would literally just download my book for free, watch all my videos for free, and then he'd be off to the races, right? Like, he would know HIPAA High-Tech, CMMC, FERPA, TCPA, CAN-SPAM. He would know all the foundational cases and case law associated with cyber insurance. He would know the limitations of cyber insurance. He would know what questions to ask. Like, he would know all this stuff. I mean, like, it's out there for free, but none of them do it.
I think I know we know our next business venture, Shiva. We need to become insurance salesmen. Maybe it'd be less stressful.
Let Joe build it. We'll franchise.
Let's do it.
You'll be the next Allstate.
Are you going to put me in good hands? No, please don't answer that.
I was like, you're a prime Marine. You know where I'm going to go with that joke. I was like, oh, come on, man. 2 military guys here. Like,
With that, I want to thank again, Joe, for joining us today on a special edition of Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified. It's been a real pleasure, conversing with you today. Please, 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 if you made it to the end of the show, thank you again for tuning in. Please go to our website, Amplified Intensified. Please subscribe, download, and dadgummit, tell a friend about us. Help us spread the word. Until next time, thank you so much.